It was actually my first sabbatical. I couldn't remember when the last one was. I tried to reconstruct it. It was a long time ago. And then what I was interested, nobody, my chair isn't here, but I sort of came to the view that traditional scholarship was not for me. I mean, other people hopefully can do that better than me. That what I'm really interested in is what they call the scholarship of teaching and learning. So that's been my main interest. And what I've tried to do is in pedagogy, unfortunately most of it's written in sort of like lees and it's totally incomprehensible and stupid, but there's a lot of great insights there as well. The example I always give is, I always used to do a thing in my first day of class where I would give students, like in ACS, I gave them two different translations of Genesis, like a totally feminist, God took a side of the creature and made it, and then the King James Version. So, and I divided a little page to work on. Well, one of the first books I said is, if you do that, give each group just one copy of the page. And they went, what? And then I remembered whenever I would do this, each kid, there was a first day of class, they'd be sitting there reading their little page, because I used to give everybody not talking to each other, and just, so then you give them each group a page. They're all, in a huddle, you read it loud, let me see it from the beginning, they're working together. So I thought maybe there are some insights here. So, and then also, just so much I've learned from talking, and this guy I learned incredible things from because I've known him longer, but so much I've learned from everyone in Villanova, and then, I had a few ideas of my own. And I put them on a website called teachphilosophy101.org. Years of administrative experience made me very uncomfortable with the idea of ever asking Villanova for anything. So it's not as impossible, I just don't want to hear it. So I got my own domain, I hired a kid to set it up for me, I really love it. It has been successful beyond my wildest dreams. I just checked yesterday, I think 6,500 different people have come this year, including one from Kazakhstan. Now we're really getting somewhere. I think I had over 200 people have been back 100 times or more. 700 people have been to 20 different pages. So check it out when and you'll be the next couple people. So, and naturally, since we're at Villanova, I wanted to talk about St. Augustine. So I know a little bit about Augustine from some of the philosophical treatises, but I thought, okay, well, the education treatises. So I read On the Teacher. Now, it's very interesting, but it is D-U-L-L. I mean, oh my God, it's so tedious. And it told me nothing that was the least bit interesting, although it's fascinating work. And I looked at On Christian Doctrine, which is a little better, but still not very helpful to anything I was interested in. And then I stumbled across this work called Instructing Beginners. Do you know this one? In faith, it's very interesting work. So what happens is...
The quote as you enter this...
Right downstairs, and also out here by the multicultural students talking to Augustine is another quote from the work. And, I'm talking about statues there. So what happened is this guy writes to Augustine, and he says, I'm teaching candidates who want to become Christians, which from the way they talk are young adults, it sounds like, and adults. And I guess being Christian was kind of a cool thing in the year 400. Some of them are there because it's cool to be Christian. They're not really that interested in anything, but they want to go through the program. I thought, that's sounding familiar. And the guy says, my classes are kind of dull. And I thought, yeah, this is sounding really familiar. Now, typically of Augustine, so the guy says, what should I tell them? He asks them for content. And Augustine says, I'm going to tell you the content. He writes the whole book, of course, but I'm also going to tell you more than you asked for, how to do it. And he says, and I can really believe this, he says, you can read all my content. He says, you really ought to watch me do it sometime. Because I'm sure he was amazing at this, because of all that training in rhetoric and communication. So it's kind of an interesting work. And so I developed, and you have in your little handout, but since we have a lot of Augustine narcs around here, and I'm not one of them. I described it, Jonathan Yates said, I said, okay, their principles inspired by Augustine. He said, fine, let's leave it at that. So I take no, the words you're going to hear are not necessarily the words of our sponsor. I mean, the words are, but the music.
Just one comment.
Yes.
It's 400. I'm not even sure he's a priest. I know he wasn't a bishop. I think he made a priest at 402, I think, somewhere around there. But this is early on in Augustine's life. He had just been converted in 387, and his philosophy was still, very much a part of him. After he became a bishop and an administrator, like you know so well, John.
This guy says it's 400, I think.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It was 400.
Oh.
If it was 400,
Oh, it's early.
just before he became, I think he might have been a priest, but I'm not sure of that.
Yeah.
But I know he wasn't a bishop.
It's before he became an administrator.
Before he became an administrator.
His teaching skills were still fresh because he was still doing a lot of teaching.
Good, thank you. Okay, so as a general principle, this is what shocked me about this work, and because it seemed to me so interesting. And again, I had read so much about teaching and learning before I read this, but what was interesting was most of what you read says very little about the relationship between the teacher and the learner. There's a lot about students that do this and do that, and a lot about teachers do this and don't do that. But it's interesting, and especially, you can understand this, there isn't a lot about the relationship, sentences about the relationship between teacher and learner that have the word love in them. But in Augustine, it's relational and it's about love, maybe not the way we're necessarily first think of it. But take a look at this quote. We're given a much more appreciative hearing when we ourselves enjoy performing our task. Then the texture of our speech is suffused with the very delight we take in speaking, and our words flow more easily and more pleasingly. This is, I think, a guiding insight that, well, it's not that, it's pretty obvious, but if the students are interested, you'll be a better teacher. If you're a better teacher, the students will be more interested. That there's a sort of symbiotic relationship between the teacher and the learner, and they're both kind of feeding each other in the good way. Now, here's the bad side. When it's not going well, the students are bored, we feel distressed at our failure, and like people expending effort to no avail, we become limp with disgust. And as a result of this very disgust, our speech becomes even more sluggish and colorless. Have we all been there? Right? And this is my favorite one. It is tiring to speak right to the end of the allotted time. Is it 11:20? All right, so, yeah, well, and the quote downstairs, set love as the criteria for all you do and all you teach and so on, is right out of this. So, that's suggesting first for us a general principle, that if there are problems in the classroom, they're, in a sense, relational problems. That the feedback loop isn't working right. And we need to really look at both sides. And, one of the things I came across in Teach Philosophy 101 is the notion of a resistance. And especially in the intro philosophy, and this is true of ethics too, a lot of students I don't want to break it to you, don't want to be there. But actually, a lot of faculty don't want to be there. Because they're thinking, how come I have to teach the intro courses? Again, service courses. I don't want to be here. You don't want to be here. So what happens is the class spirals downward, and everybody's having a bad experience. This is one of my favorite stories. The story about the electric mattress, right? So, if you ever had an electric mattress with dual controls and one for the one side and the other side. So the couple gets the controls switched. So they get in the bed, and let's say it's a husband and a wife, and the husband thinks, kind of chilly in here, I think I'll turn up my blankie. So he turns it up a little bit, and the wife's getting really hot over there. And she says, it's getting kind of hot here, I think I'll turn it down. So he's getting really cold. So he's like, oh! Well, that's how it goes when it goes bad. That you're in an unstable system that's spiraling out of control. So that's the first general principle, is that it's a dynamic relationship it's a feedback loop, as the engineers call it. Okay, now here's the second one that kind of follows from that. And this is really what sparked this whole book. The difficult part of our task is not in giving rules about covering the content, although that's not easy. Our greatest concern is much more how to make it possible for those who offer instruction to do so with joy. For the more they succeed in this, the more appealing they will be, and the more content they can deliver. So, we're always talking about content, and, I have so much to cover, and blah, blah, blah. But what Augustine is saying is, I don't want to hear about your content until you create a magical relationship. Because without that, you're not going to deliver any content, especially if content's something you want people to actually care about. So that's kind of our second principle. And the third one that makes complete sense if you think about that is that if teaching is about a relationship, then you got to know the partners in the relationship. And they need to know something about you. Now for Augustine says, talk to their friends and find out what they're like. Because he's in this community of people who want to become Christians. Well, we're not in that. Well, sometimes you can talk to their friends. But for us, it's more about understanding campus life, the kind of pressures that students go through. There's a great deal of literature on what students, the kind of evolutionary stages of students. So we kind of really need to know our students. And here's Augustine, and this sounds like Jack Duty. Jack makes all his students send him an email before class what they got out of reading, because why do you do that?
Well, that way I read what they've gotten out of the text before I go into class. When I go into class, I already know what they think.
And then,
right, Erica?
And then he adapts what he's going to say to where they're coming from. So he's not coming in, okay, I'm going to tell you what I know. So, and Augustine says, in my own experience as teacher, I'm swayed in one way now and another according to the characteristics, the background of the person I see in front of me and to receive instruction. And he talks about, are they rich, are they poor? It doesn't get into multiculturalism, but the whole works. And it's in keeping with these various influences that my actual address opens and moves forward and comes to a close. So, it's kind of a interactive model. So, comments, thoughts about that all so far? I want to do some applications, but let's stop there.
When you were teaching, didn't you give them cards to write down where they were from, what they were, yeah.
All that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, could I remember that?
So much more easy nowadays with email and other things to be very interactive with students even outside the classroom. I find, you get to learn as much about students outside the classroom as you win through their communications.
Ever ancient, ever new,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What are the comments about the general framework? Does this make sense to you?
It gets harder the more students you end up with. And that's one of the things that challenges, you do a small group, a small section, all of these steps become easier to manage and engage, and then you move it up and you've got 2 or 3 or more sections, you got multiple, then it's harder, I find, sometimes to get to know the students as well, or to, manage those kinds of interactions. And so it's trying to figure out how do you scale some of this. That's often the challenge I find. When I read some of these teaching books, I see these great ideas, or for example, and we just got through it, so these guys are familiar when you're interviewing for young teachers coming in, and some of these young teachers have these great ideas. They just, this wonderful idea. And you start, you say, well, when you implemented this idea, how many students did you work with? I had 10 students in the section. We had these 90 readings and we were aligned. And it's like, yeah, okay, so now if you do it with 30 or 60 or 90, how do you do it? And so, but no, they're great. It all makes perfect sense.
And there's a different, one is how you're going to do it with 100 people in a room, and another is how you're going to do it 3 times a day.
Right.
Yeah. Same old. So, and we'll talk about those, yeah.
You mentioned, not wanting to teach a certain course, intro course or anything. The other variable is time when you teach the course. I actually love teaching core humanities, but one semester Jack scheduled me at 8:30 in the morning. I am not a morning person. And it was first semester, and neither were the students. Second semester, they self-select. It's the worst course I ever taught. You talk about devolving out. It just covers because I was having sleep, they were having sleep. Worst guidance course I've ever gotten. Everything, just reinforced that it was really a bad experience for them and for me.
Right.
Now I had the same course at 10 o'clock, much better. I was awake, they were awake, and the guidance course reflected it.
Okay, and we will come exactly. Augustine has a section on what to do when the students are tired and on it.
Can I jump on this point for a second? A person who's doing 3 sections of ethics, 90 people, is going to be hard-pressed to employ the kind of one-to-one that you get if you're only doing 1 section of 30 and stuff like that. But the principle behind this is something that you always need to keep in mind. And whenever I did Intro to Philosophy team talk with 150 kids in Talentine 215, rather than have the grad students do the breakout classes, we actually did the breakout classes. So once a week, half the kids were in a room of 15, and we did 4 sections. I did 4 sections. And that way you got to know those kids. And now it's almost impossible for a professor to know 150 kids, but we did it by doing our own breakouts and doing all the stuff on the Friday that you couldn't do in a large class on Monday and Wednesday. My second example would be that, and again, this is just one section, but one year when I was doing ethics at Notre Dame, and I had 42 kids in the class, and so it was not going to be a discussion class. But I was only teaching 2 classes that semester, so I could do this. I found out that everybody in the 9:30 section who didn't have class at 10:30. And so what I did is, Monday and Wednesday would be a class of 42, and on Friday, I just taught an extra hour, and I taught both 9:30 and 10:30 and broke the class into 2 21s, and that way I got to know some of the kids much better in a smaller class. So so it's not the case that you always have to teach an extra hour in order to do this, but you have to be able to go the extra mile, whatever that extra mile would look like, in order to try to accomplish this. Now, that ain't going to work for any of us who's doing 3 sections of ethics. I mean, you can't divide those 3 sections up and have 6 sections on Friday. But there's always ways to think creatively about how you can cross the boundary of impersonality.
One thing you can do with large classes is break them into discussion groups. I find I get to learn the students' names a whole lot faster when we're groups of 6 or 7 in a discussion group, and I go around from group to group. And so, it's the same idea as Jack said, but, within a class of 35.
The other thing is, and we'll get to all these practical things in just a second, but, and my wife, some of you met Kathy Burns, is in student life, and I live virtually on campus, and I know a lot of students, and that insofar as you start to know the student culture a little bit, that lets you reference, like today I was talking about sophism, and I just heard last night that, I wasn't there, but at dinner, that all the kids in the apartments, now, if there are 4 kids in an apartment, they each put in $250 and buy a huge flat screen TV. So everybody has a 50-inch flat screen TV. And now, what happens when they graduate, or at the end of the year, nobody, but, it's a very real example. So, let's look at some of these, and by the way, CAT scores is an interesting question, because Augustine talks about CAT scores, sort of. What he says is, it's not about we're seeking people to like us. It's about we need them to like this class because that'll help us do a good job. So now, let's talk about class discussion, okay? And so that's a good example. And here's a nice quote. So Augustine says, by the way, just what Jim said, a shy class can really kill you. Because you come in here and go blah, 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 and deer in the headlights. So what are you going to do? All right, so Augustine sort of got the idea, his idea. With gentle encouragement, we should drive out the exaggerated fear that prevents the student from making known where he stands. And we should temper his shyness by instilling in him the value of our fraternal communion. By asking questions, we should try and find out whether he understands what has been said. And we should give him confidence to voice freely any objection he thinks he ought to be raised. So, let me just... so, a couple things going on here. We need, in a discussion-oriented class, we need the students to be participating or we'll die. And so how do we get that? Well, what Augustine suggests is we need to understand what the fears are, what the obstacles are. So let's take a minute now. I'm sort of curious where you come. Plenty noisy before you get in there, right? They're blabbing away, and you watch them leave the class, and they're blabbing, but you can't shut them up. So why are they deer in the headlight?
A lot of them think they're going to say something stupid. They're afraid they're going to sound stupid. They don't really know what they're talking about. Even the ones who are extremely intelligent have that fear.
Fear of looking stupid. There's another fear, by the way, of looking smart.
Fear of being the teacher's pet, being ostracized because they're liked by the teacher.
Right. Are you listening to this? Why don't students participate?
Those are 2 main reasons, I would say.
Okay. What are we going to do about it?
Some people tend to be more quiet than others too, and that's part of personalities. They've done studies, and generally women are less inclined to voice opinions in class than men. And that's a generalization. It's not always true, obviously. But it is, when I'm teaching, a lot of nurses, you know, I know they're bright students, but they're kind of reluctant, but they're pretty things down, they do very well in exams. They just don't participate a whole lot, you know, unlike philosophy of law, where you really do participate a lot.
And they might be having more trouble in philosophy, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, so look, the ultimate fear is I'm going to look stupid or I'm going to look smart. So how are we going to, strategies?
I think, just backing up momentarily, I think conditioning plays a large part too. I mean, depending on the type of education they've had, much of our, secondary education system still revolves around simply being lectured to, spit information at them, they regurgitate it. It's not dynamic in any way, it's not participatory.
So it's new. It makes it even more frightening. Good. So what are you going to do about it? I mean, how do you reduce that fear?
Well, it's on us to demonstrate that if they open their mouth and say something that actually isn't that intelligent, that we're not going to slam them over the head with that. So the response on the professor's part always has to be welcoming of their comment, even if it's not, right on target or even misses the mark completely. To somehow respond in a, as Augustine said, in a
Fraternal community.
congenial or fraternal community.
Okay. So creating a safe space
Right.
is good. What else?
I think in ethics and politics classes, another barrier can be when the students perceive the difference here to be a difference that becomes ideological, and they get on the wrong side of the faculty member, liberal, conservative. In our case, Catholic, not Catholic, picture of goody two-shoes versus, a libertarian, and they don't want to expose themselves on either side of that ideological divide. That's a problem that you have in ethics that you don't have if you're doing metaphysics.
And what do you do about it?
What's that?
What do you do about that?
If you can target who the students are, encourage them to express their opinions and try to, really bring them out, whatever it takes to do that.
Working for this, you're working for that. Then they don't have to, it's okay if I defend this. I'm not going to offend, that was my job. So you can give them permission to be out there by telling them what to say.
I would, along with that, I was going to say that there's a sense of, there's safety in a little bit of margin of detachment. So if I'd say, will someone play devil's advocate? So that's role playing in a way, but also even if you've asked them to write it down, whether it's before the class or even given them time in the class to write their class down, instead, I think the question of not what you think, but what did you write down? There's even a little bit of space where it's not about them as a person anymore. It's about something else out here, and it gives them some comfort.
That's huge, right? That takes some time. So what do you think is a lot harder than, and what did you write? Because you did write something. So time, and Carol Weiss always has this thing, how long do teachers wait for a response? You heard her say this, like average 0.3 seconds. Okay, another question. I think all those are really, take a look at your little handout here. And here's a page from this classic website that we all love to see it. I'm here in Enhancing Class Discussion. And I tried to sort of listen to a lot of what I heard and come up with a kind of set of, starting with the thing that people love to talk, and the problem is to get them to shut up. Now, in classroom, how do you get them to talk? And so, if you sort of go through them, people don't talk because they're not interested in the material. Well, we have a little control over that in ethics anyway. That material could be great. And also, I think how much material you assign, I'll come back to that, increases the confidence level. They didn't do the assignment. It's a big reason because they're afraid they look stupid. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. They didn't understand the assignment. I taught a course at Penn one time, and I remember the woman gave us this really interesting book to read. It was so interesting. So I read, for that week I read that book. And I came in the next week and she said, well, what she wanted to talk about was some aspect of the book never even occurred to me. I said, that was interesting. Why didn't you tell me that was what you were going to talk about? Because I would have gotten much more out of it. But, we don't always tell them what we want them to get. Now, I know it's good for them to figure it out and all that, but to follow the more direction we give them. This is, I think, and we talked about fear of being put down. This is that big one, fear of other students, that we talked about. And my own view is, I once told this in a simplified way, but how do I say it? You know, in the court they say, never ask a question if you don't know the answer. Well, here's a rule for a classroom: never ask a question if you do know the answer. Because why are you asking them? You know, you're setting yourself up because they know you know the answer, and they're either going to get it right, in which case it's going to be a problem for them one way, or they're going to get it wrong, it's going to be another problem. And then, of course, the other thing is, when they get it right, you're going to ask them a follow-up. So it's even worse. So that suggests, at least in the beginning, questions that are, what's an example of this? What do you think about this? How would you react to this? All those lower the fear quotient. Do you follow? I mean, you all know this anyway. Okay, so you get the picture? So, but Augustine gives us such a nice way to think about it. Okay, let's try a different one. Now this is my favorite one. Okay, the kids start out strong, right? But it often happens that someone who was listening in the beginning with pleasure later becomes tired. And he now opens his mouth no longer to express approval, but to yawn. Okay? We should reawaken his attention by making a remark spiced with seemingly good humor. And he does a bunch of things you could do. Tell a story, you know, do whatever. Now, so we're going to try a little experiment. Now, I did not hear, ever take one of these and pass them around. I did not hear that reassuring ping when you plug something into your computer, so I'm not totally positive that this is going to work out here. But so one of the things that you'll see in the literature, and it's tremendous common sense, is classroom assessment techniques. You familiar with this? Okay, and take two if you want. You know. Don't be shy. Maybe one here. Give the man one too. But make sure you get it back from the script search after the thing. So, but one of the things that people talk about is in a class. You know, my view is, and I think the research supports it, is a college student can't pay attention for more than 15 or 20 minutes. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's some primitive thing. The lizard brain, you know, if we don't see some motion in the environment or something new, we don't. Okay. So what we need, and Augustine sort of suggests this, we need to reset their attention. Like, bingo, wake up. Okay. Now, there's a million ways to do that, but one way to do that is what we call classroom assessment techniques, which is the idea of giving some brief, ungraded feedback, like write down the most important word in this that we're talking about today. All right, so all of a sudden you've got to wake up, or write down an example of this and hand it in, or there's a million of these. But the advantage to that is twofold. First of all, it gives you a clue where they're doing, and then it kind of gets them engaged in doing something. And talk about know your students. What these kids like is doing stuff. They hate sitting there. They're always doing, Eric and I teach a class together. Their kids are always moving, right? Like today, they're making posters. So each three kids has to make a poster on the particular story from Genesis and and put it up here and there. Magic markers are flying around, and then they make a presentation, and of course they don't know who's going to make the presentation until the last minute, right? So they can't be free riders. All right, so now one of the things we're looking at now is clickers. So, and there's a lot of interesting things from clickers. Don't vote yet. So what you do is you buy, and I'm not sure somebody press their clicker just to see if it's working. Okay, great. All right, so what happens is kids buy this in the bookstore, and it's their clicker. It's about $30, and then you've got the hardware up at your end. There's a little thing that plugs in, and so you can use them for all kinds of things. For example, you can say, okay, you can give a little quiz, and how many people think that Plato's theory is X? Well, you see, like, not too many people have it. Okay, or is it this or is it that? I see you're divided. Get in a little group. Talk about it. All right, so anyway, let's try it. So which comes closer to your view? We need to set higher expectations for students, or we need to engage students where they are and bring them along? Press 1 or 2, obviously. Okay, good. I think you all voted. Okay, now, as usual, the people who come to a teaching thing always think this. So, what can I say? But it's great. It's kind of, okay. So which comes closer to your view? We should assign more reading than we can cover in class, or try and limit the readings to what you can cover in class? Please vote. How do you think it's going to come out? Let's see. Okay, interesting. A little bit more tough love over here. Somebody flipped over. Okay. Why don't students do their assigned reading? What's the main reason? You can take attendance with these too.
Planet Earth uses clickers, Frank Maloney and...
Yeah, some of the science classes are now using them.
They have for about 3 years.
Okay. I think this is the big one, by the way. We had a great workshop this summer, and we were talking with a bunch of ACS faculty and the students who are working with us. And I don't know if you know Jackie Morani, but this is what she said. She said, if you're a student, what you think is, why should I do this assignment now? Not why should I do it, but why should I do it now? And if there's no reason why you should do it now, you're not going to do it, because you have 5,000 other crazy things to do. So, it's just that simple. It's not that you're lazy, it's not that you're not interested, it's not that you don't manage your time. Well, probably all these things also, but that's the main thing. There's no reason for you to do it. Now, a reason could be, they're going to call on me, there's a quiz, I'll be in group, I have to do an email to Jack. Those things might make me interested in it. Not interested, make me do it instead of something else I have to do. Okay, so again, this is what we call classroom assessment techniques, which are little exercises that kind of wake people up. So what do you think? Examples, other ways to wake people up and kind of get them going here. And what do you think of the clickers?
Cool.
They were great at class in the Planet Earth.
Now, you could require students to buy one of these?
Yeah, $35.
Yeah, they come with their textbooks.
There are faculty doing that on campus now.
Oh, I know, yeah, sure.
Yeah, Planet Earth, it comes with your textbook, and then I go to activate it.
This is our new company, Turning Technologies. So it comes with some sort of bundle in the
So you
bookstore.
order the book.
And then the kids register online. They can use it for every class they take. And since we're standardizing on this one, of course, naturally, feeding departments aren't doing it, but we're trying to standardize on this one. So if they give another class, they can just re-register. And sometimes they have to pay another $5 or something like that for a different class. If they lose it, they can get a new one and re-register it. So, anyway. So, reactions, what do you think?
Well, what's cool about this is it really gets to your point of getting them where they are. They feel like they're at home voting on American Idol. And so they're really into this.
Yeah. Someday when your cell phones will do it, then we'll really be set.
Let me see if I have the other one I did today.
Is it integrated right into PowerPoint? So, because you had it with the slides, so does it?
Yeah, you just pop them in the PowerPoint there. Here, let me show you the one I did today in my other class. Okay, so you don't care if you vote, but most people are mostly or do you want to vote? No, most people are selfish. Yes, they said. Selfish people desire material things. The moral life requires one to be unselfish. Yeah, that sounds about right. Most people are moral because they fear the consequences of being immoral. Okay, now here's Plato. Material things give only momentary happiness. Well, that sounds right too. Okay, desire for material things causes conflict and immoral behavior. Yeah, I guess so. Desire for material things causes unhappiness and immorality. No. Okay, but it was a great setup because they kind of had to commit to what we were talking about in class, one way or the other. But they do experiments with these where people, there's one guy that show of hands about a factual question to which there's right answers versus clickers. Many more people get the right answer on show of hands than on clickers. Why is that?
Well, they see
Follow
what,
the crowd.
who's
They look
raising their
around and
hands.
they see this kid's smart. I'll do whatever,
Absolutely.
whatever that kid did. You know? Whereas this, it's like it's anonymous. You know, they can do it. So it's really neat, I think. And for factual questions, to start a discussion, to get people to take, and they love it, and you don't want to overdo it. And again, it's quite simple. Just to show you, I'm just take a second on this because it's kind of new. So let's. So I'm gonna blah blah blah.
Takes the fear factor out of it.
Right. There's no fear in that, right? Insert slide.
Nobody's gonna see it.
So 3D pie chart. Enter the question up here. Blah blah. Then more. It's and then you have, this is the fun part. I love this. I'm not going to go. Insert object. So like here's answer now. Little scroll. Insert object. Countdown. Like you can have a ball drop. Now what I haven't figured out how to do is you can have the music from what's that show?
Jeopardy.
Jeopardy or
Jeopardy.
Yeah. So I don't know how to do that. Okay.
You'll,
all right.
you'll know by the end of the week.
Yeah. No, sorry. Okay. So you get the picture. So wake them up. Yes.
Do you think there's a tension at all between the
Yes,
Augustinian
I do.
model?
Whatever it's going to be.
Signature clicker, yes or no.
But go ahead.
A tension between the Augustinian model that you were presenting earlier, which is very dialogical and interpersonal, and then this sort of gadgetry that facilitates anonymity.
Well, that goes to your question, which is, yeah, but what do I do with a class of 100?
Right.
So, email, technology, know who your students are, this is what they like, American Idol. Sure. I mean, listen, Dr. Hasnall that wants to give us like seminars, 10 kids in the tutorial twice a week with one student, it's fine with me. I used to be in that. But yeah, it's tremendous tension. But we're all skating. Trying right back. Okay, let's talk about one last thing. And then, let's see, let me get back to my other PowerPoint. Because I have one last quote for you, and then I got to we'll talk a little bit about that, and then run do my other class here. Blah, blah, blah.
Did you do this presentation to the faculty?
No.
You should.
Oh, thank you. Okay, we already did that. Oh, and cats, blah, 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 blah. Okay, and here, groups, there's some other, you all know the Think, Pair, Share one. Take two students, get together, talk, come up with an idea. I have a page on there and teach philosophy on groups. I have learned a lot about groups. I used to really mess up groups in class when you were a freshman, right? I'm better now. Hope so, never mind.
You're very good now, but you were good then.
Oh, good. Thank you. You're so sweet. Okay. All right. Now, here's the one I wanted to get. What about for the teacher? Because for Augustine, it's always a relationship between the teacher and the student. And when the thing is going bad, it's on both sides. So, and Augustine talks a lot about that. And I love this quote. He says, "Pay no attention to the beautiful sights of the city where we live. Our own enjoyment is revived by sharing in the enjoyment that others derive from seeing them for the first time. And this we experience the more intensely the closer our friendship is. For the more a bond of love allows us to be present in others, the more what has grown old becomes new again in our eyes as well." That's what it's all about in teaching, don't you think? Is to take that same old stuff, like Descartes Meditation 1, and make that new to yourself. And so, how...
Some of that has come down to me, where I go back and forth, I still struggle with this. The difference between going into a class thinking that you're trying to help give them a mastery of a subject matter versus introducing them to interesting stuff. And just kind of realizing that, you know, it may go further in some classes than it does in others. You may cover some things and not others with different groups, and that's okay, versus that sense of like, no, you know, we've got to get these, you know, I've got to get teleology and deontology, and I've got to get, you know, virtue, and I've got to get certain things laid out, and by the end of the semester they need to know those things, versus that the way we tend to come at it, you know, freedom, if you can let yourself have that sometimes, to take that into the classroom, where it's like, look, you know, so what if they can't give me the three versions of the categorical imperative? So what if they can't define virtue the way Aristotle defines it? If they can, you know, get some of that energy and excitement and bring it to a thinker and topic and play with that, that's good, that's important, and that's good enough in a way.
And what Augustine says is, and they're not going to get that content anyway,
Right.
unless they're having fun with it. So we're going to be having more fun, and they're going to be having more fun, and we're going to do it with joy. And then that will suffuse the light. And so, you know, I think this is one of those, the opposite of the electric blanket story. If we making it new, we're finding new ways to do it, they're getting more of it. It's like, I don't know who this was, but it's a very nice man that teaches a class on Genesis just before my ACS class. I'm not sure theology or whatever, but it's obvious we're on the same track. So I go in, and we're going to have role plays. Some students are going to be the snake, some are going to be Adam, some are going to be Eve, some are going to be God, some of them are going to be a robin in the tree of life observing the whole thing. And the board is covered with the documentary hypothesis and J and P and all that stuff. And I thought, you know, one of this is, we're doing this in very different ways, is I guess my only conclusion from that. But I think at a certain point we have to play with it. And I think one of the things about these neat pedagogy things, groups and stuff, is it's fun. We play, we get excited, we try something new. It keeps that alive for us. So that's kind of what happened for me. You've all been very patient. It's amazing. It's not what you thought you were going to see in Augustine. I love that. They only open their mouth to yawn. Okay, so I have to have my clickers back. That's the real.
Well, thank you very much.
You're so welcome.